Hello and welcome to Not to Get Political, the podcast where we delve into the world of politics and hope to remain unscathed. I'm your host, the Champagne Socialist, and I'm very delighted to announce that for our first guest for this podcast, I am joined by Patsy Stevenson. Patsy is a feminist writer and activist. Patsy, it is lovely to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So, how did you get into activism?
God, I mean, going back a long time, I think I was always like an activist, but I didn't really know what it meant. And so I remember I think I was like 10 years old or something. And I used to drink cow's milk. I don't anymore because that's gross. But at the time, I remember seeing like cows and I was like, oh, I wonder if the cows who are producing that milk are okay in the farm. Yeah. It was a really small thing, but I ended up calling Sainsbury's over and over and over again to the point where they were like, okay, it's this cow, it's this farm, and I was like, okay, good, and I made sure the cow was okay, and it was such a small thing, but I thought, that is activism. Activism can be really small. Another one was when we had like a fox hunting ban repeal, and David Ames was, unfortunately, the late David Ames was. He was the MP where I lived at the time, and I wrote to him, and he was a very kind man. Although we did not see eye to eye on a lot of things. Yeah. He was very nice to people that wrote to him, and he was fully supportive of the ban. So things like that. But yeah, I didn't really like when the vigil happened. I was just at university. I wasn't really. I'd stand up for things, and I was part of a women in STEM group at uni. But
because you studied physics, right?
Yeah, I studied physics. I was really into it, and it was a shame. Like I've failed now, which is annoying. But I just kept doing the women's rights stuff, and I just found myself not really having enough time for the university stuff.
That's understandable. I guess it's. I've often spoken to other activists, and they've talked about this idea of sort of activist burnouts, where it essentially reaches a point where you've been going on for so long, and then you sort of stop for a moment and just
collapse.
It collapses. Yeah. You're just completely exhausted. But I want to talk about the vigil and sort of the build up to it. Now, for those of you who don't know what we are referring to the Sarah Everard vigil, which happened 2 years ago, wasn't it?
2021, yeah.
Okay. Could you sort of talk us through?
So what happened for me, like I said, I was a uni student. I hadn't gone out during COVID or anything like that. Very much stuck to the rules, and then considering the current climate of everything that was going on. I know. I think at the same sort of time the vigil was going on, the same sort of time I was being arrested was around the time Boris Johnson was apparently having a party or attending a party or drinking wine.
You didn't know it was a party. It was ambushed by a cake. Don't forget that.
I didn't know that the vigil was going on. I just happened to be there apparently. But you've got to cut that bit out.
I'm keeping that.
But no, like so. I basically, a week before the vigil, my uncle, my mum called me up and said my uncle was in hospital because he was homeless and he was staying at a hostel and he had had a heroin overdose. And so he was unconscious, he was still alive, but I immediately went to Brighton from Egham and looked after him for the next 5 days. And that was really hard. He was completely unconscious. I just kind of wanted the doctors to know that he had a family and stuff, and to really like try the hardest. And they did. And when he passed away, I found out a lot of stuff. And one of the hostel workers said that my uncle was asking for me as he was being put into the stretcher and stuff like that, and said that I was his next of kin. And so obviously it was in no paperwork, but for me that really hit me hard of like, oh, I was responsible, like I have this responsibility and I am an adult and I can do these things. And then I went home, absolutely grief stricken, and then that was like the first time I'd watched TV in ages because I don't really watch TV. But I saw that Sarah Everard had gone missing, and I can't remember if we'd found out she'd been murdered then, because it was all quite a blur. But I remember seeing it and just thinking, though, I can't believe this is happening. And I felt so bad for her family because I knew where my uncle was, and they don't even know where she is. And I just, to think of them going through that was a lot. So I went and then I was photographed being arrested.
Because I remember when all of that was going on and I was covering covering what was going on at the time via TikTok, and I was on live. I was doing a live stream at the time, and we were talking about what men can do to help women feel safe, which we will get on to later. And I remember people in the comments going, "You seen what's happening in London? You seen what's happening at the vigil?" I was like, "What's going on at the vigil?" So I go on Twitter and I see what's going on. I see waves of police officers basically kettling predominantly young women at this vigil, which up to that point had been a very peaceful vigil. Actually, Princess Kate had attended it to show her solidarity. And then to contrast it, about an hour or so later, we see all these police officers clamping down on it. Because I know there was a lot of, not controversy, but there was lots of debate as to whether it should go ahead because of the COVID restrictions. In the end, it did go ahead, but then obviously what happened with the police, and that's kind of
Reclaim These Streets won their case.
Yeah.
So Reclaim These Streets said, because I think it was the police never actually gave solid reasons for it not to go ahead, or it was, they could have made it safe. People were going to go anyway.
Yeah, of course.
So they could have made it better. There's a lot of controversy around what I said as well, because I said, the police should have been there. What I meant was that Reclaim These Streets asked them to be there in a certain way to help people, to make sure it was safe and everyone was distanced and it was okay to do.
So I remember from the photos, because it was around sort of I can't remember is it a temple sort of style? It was
the
around the bandstand, and everyone was 2 meters apart for the most part. Candles.
I can't even comment on that, unfortunately.
This is
the thing. Yeah, I can't comment on loads of things.
So we get to the point. You're on the ground, and that photo is taken. You weren't aware that obviously it was flash, but you weren't sort of aware of what was going on at that
there
point.
Were a lot of cameras around me. I looked up, there were just so many cameras around me.
How were your retinas?
I was stunned. I was on it. I don't like, the whole thing feels like a really bad dream.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I still have nightmares about it. It's really weird.
It was quite a defining moment for your life and career, really, if you think about it.
Completely turned it upside down.
So then you are released by the police. What happens next?
I remember I walked down the road to try and find my friend, so we could go home, because I need to go. I want to go to bed, because that is just like, my adrenaline was all over the place, and I have BPD as well, so my emotions are hard to regulate anyway. So I was just all over the place, and I remember walking down the street, and I think it was like a group of people, and they had put a candle outside for Sarah or something like that, and they asked me for a selfie. And I'm like in a daze. I was like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, why do they want a selfie of me? Like, maybe they think I'm someone else. I don't know. And then I was like, what's the selfie about? They were like, oh, like, you got arrested, didn't you? I was like, how did you know I got arrested? They were like, you're on the front page. And I was like, the front page of what? And they said, everything. And I say that in everything I ever say. It's like that moment I was like, what do you mean everything? And people say, how were you on the front page if it wasn't the next day? I'm like, because online, everything moves so quickly.
That was the thing. I think I remember when I was covering it at the time. And then, because I remember seeing your photo was one of the first things to pop up when you search on Twitter and you put Sarah Everard Vigil, and then you see all of these events that are going on, and your face is there.
My name was number one trending in the world, and I was like,
how does that feel? It must be a really weird.
Yeah, I felt sick. It feels like not real. Like, I'm even tearing up a bit thinking about how I felt back then. Like, it's a weird emotion. It's not necessarily sadness, but it's like just overwhelming.
I guess it's your name as well. It's very important to you, and
someone leaked my name, so it's not something I could have held on to, unfortunately. But again, with BPD, because like borderline personality disorder, for those who don't know, but with that, it's very hard to manage your emotions sometimes. And in something like that, where you've gone viral worldwide overnight, I couldn't sleep. My family lived really far away, so I had no one around me. And then I think my friend called me up and said, do you want me to check your Twitter for an hour so you can get an hour's sleep? And I was like, okay. I literally had 1 hour's sleep, and that was it. And then the next day I was like, I woke up and my phone was non-stop with requests, like every single social media platform. I still got them, like on the messages. I had like Vogue, New York Times, like anything you can think of from around the world as well.
And you think fast forward, you think sort of fast back, sort of 24 hours, no one knew who you were. And then fast forward 24 hours, suddenly, you've got everyone wanting to know who you are and get that exclusive.
Yeah, and someone even asked me if they could hang my picture on a canvas on their wall. Like, my picture is around London homes, which I find very odd. Like, yeah. The weirdest thing as well is when people say, "Oh, you look so beautiful," in that. Like, I'm.
That's a weird thing.
It's not a great photo of me. Like, I'm.
It's an icon. I'd say it's a pretty iconic photo, and it's very resemblant to the time. You think you got your face mask on.
Yeah.
It's and it kind of, and you consider the circumstances of which Sarah Everard was killed by Wayne Couzens, a police officer.
Yeah.
To see the police respond to a young woman, and this is what I met. Well, the first time I met you was at the Enough Is Enough rally.
Yeah.
A few weeks back, and you tapped me on the back, and when I turned around, I didn't initially recognise you because when I'd seen you on TV, you always struck me as someone that was quite tall.
Yeah.
And when I saw you, and I'm looking at this very petite,
foot.
petite 5 foot girl.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what clicked for me because I'm looking at you and I'm thinking, there's the amount of force that was used, and you can see it in that photo. You've got 4 or 5 police officers around you pinning you down.
There's
and
videos
you think,
as
and
well.
you think, and you think that was for one. Because I mean this with no disrespect. You don't really pose a threat. I mean, you don't look like. And then you contrast that with the police's attitudes towards the sort of counter protest during the BLM movement. The guys who went down to defend statues. I put that in air quotes because there was no statues to defend. And also with the crowd issues at the Euros as well. Some of and the way that the police sort of handled that, and it seemed like they were just letting fans run rampant.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, in your case, it was
And that's the thing is, I know so much about what happened that night.
Yeah.
I know about what they said to each other. I know so much that hasn't been put in the media.
Yeah.
Because I'm going through legal proceedings. I haven't been able to say
Of
my
course,
piece.
yeah.
But when it first happened, all the police just jumped on the PR trains and just said sides of the story of I think one police officer spoke about one of my friends, apparently, one of my current friends. We weren't friends back then, but we've become friends through protests and stuff. And she said, I was there, and this police lady, I said to her, how would you like it if you had been raped and murdered?
Yeah.
And the police lady said, oh, there were protesters telling me I should be raped and murdered. It's like, you've twisted that. And they spun it any which way they could.
That is the thing with the police, though. There is very much this mentality of we look after our own. You think, this is years ago, but Plebgate, which was basically where the police had completely fabricated what this minister had said to a police officer. This whole idea of sort of looking after our own and the culture within the police. And we're being told that it's changing within the Met Police. But...
big eye roll.
There's a big eye roll. I mean, they got rid of Cressida Dick, but even then, it's the analogy they always say it's like the one bad apple thing. And I worked a few years ago. I worked on a fruit and veg stand. There's always a policy when you had a punnet of strawberries. If one of them was mouldy, you took that one out, but you checked all the other strawberries as well to make sure that they hadn't come into contact with the mouldy strawberry. And if they'd come into contact with that strawberry, you removed it. And in the end, maybe you won't have any strawberries in the punnets, but you are thorough.
Yeah.
And,
I feel like what the police are doing is painting the strawberries red at this
There's
point.
no mould here.
Yeah, what
mould?
It's
supposed to taste that way. What are you on about?
Never even seen mould in this punnet. Yeah, that is basically it. And I think the Met Police especially, it is all police forces, but because it's so systemic.
Yeah.
And it's not just sexism, it's the racism, it's the homophobia, the transphobia. They are awful. They are so corrupt. And the fact is, they've come out with these reports only because of public pressure.
Yeah.
It's not like they've gone, you know what, we've got an issue here, we're going to come out about it. It's they've had to do it through 2 years since the vigil, and they're finally coming out with a bit. And
well, I guess there's been so many scandals that they kind of start with one. It's like, lads, we've got another one.
And there was a guy that recently that said, "Oh, where are the nice stories about the police and the good work we're doing?" I'm like, well, I mean, show me one, number one. But that is your job. You shouldn't be given a medal for doing your job, for doing the basic of what you're meant to be doing. Yeah, it's just.
And then from what I understand, with joining police forces, that different forces have different vetting processes. And do you think that's something that will change and they'll have one process for all police forces to follow?
I mean, hopefully. But to be honest, the more I learn about policing as a whole, the more I believe in defunding the police. And I think there's other ways. I think, you know, I used to think, obviously we need police. Why would we, like, what would we have in place of them? But there's actually a lot of activists who have written books on it, who have done extensive research on how we could live in a world without police or policing the way that it is. Say, for example, defund the police and put that funding into youth centres or ways to stop crime. Because if you start in the communities and look after the communities, there's going to be less crime anyway.
Exactly. And I guess that with the saying like defund the police, it's part of these sort of 3-word slogans we've seen pop up. And it's one that people will look at and go, what? No police? What are we going to get? But it's that. It's basically just reinvest in different areas of society and within the police force itself in terms of sort of learning and how to handle certain situations. But the thing is, that's quite a long thing to say, so you just shorten it to defund the police.
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, I talk about this stuff, and I do know about feminism and about women's rights, but, you know, there are a lot of other people who know a lot more about policing, and I think what we need to take away from it sometimes is that I didn't have a lot of control over where my image was used and what it was used for and things like that. So a lot of people were saying, oh, this is police brutality. It is in a sense, but it's a very small part of it. Police oftentimes are targeting marginalised groups. That's where it is. And, you know, that's not my thing to talk about. Yeah. But there's a lot of people out there.
But do you think maybe one of the reasons that your image went so far is because you are a white woman?
Yes, definitely. I mean, 100%. It's the reason I'm able to have a platform as well. You know, there were people there who I went on the Guilty Feminist podcast with a woman who was black, and she said she had to write down a solicitor's number on her arm and have food with her because she knew she might be arrested. I had the privilege of thinking that I might not be arrested. That didn't even come into my head. Unfortunately, that did happen, but it's very rare. And I think that when I was photographed, a lot of white women woke up and went, oh my God, this can happen to us.
Obviously, I can't speak for women because I'm not one. But I guess there's always that notion in the back of the head, you know, when you're walking along a street, you know, you have your keys between your fingers, you know, you text people where you're going. And that's what Sarah Everard did in that case, actually. She did everything, and she was still attacked by someone who was supposed to serve and protect the community. I do want to get onto this thing because your photo goes everywhere. You're appearing on all of these TV shows, channels, podcasts. You're doing everything. Your face is everywhere. With that comes the flack. With that comes the criticism. And one of the criticisms that was kind of leveled to you was this idea that you were trying to be the sort of the face of sort of 4th, 5th wave feminism. How did you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, when it first happened, like I said, I've got BPD, so sometimes my brain can sort of go, oh, this is what I am. I'm being told I'm this thing. So I sort of run with it. So a lot of media companies, especially, they will hype you up. They will be like, you're amazing. You're so inspirational. And it's it was just, I was in this space where I thought that I was going to help people in that way. Unfortunately, that's not the way to do it. No. The way to do it is to learn and to listen to people and to really get as much information as you can and then stay in your lane, basically. Because
as you said, before this, you had really no, in terms of with women's rights, within feminist activism, you had, that was your first sort of jump into the pool, if you will, and it was quite the jump to make.
Yeah, and I'd always supported women's rights in the past, and I'd always been quite outspoken about feminist issues, but on a small scale. Yeah. And I'm also queer, so I'd also talk about that as well. When I was at university, I'd talk about women in STEM and try and push for that. But I'd never really had that big a responsibility on me, where young girls were looking at me as if I was some beacon of hope, or, you know, someone that would give them the information that was needed. And really, in that first year at least, I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't know what I was talking about. And it was pushed on me, I think, because media companies especially are like, well, she didn't really know what she's talking about, but we can use that. We can make her say things, or, you know, and that's the way it goes. But now,
it's kind of like we can mold you into this sort of feminist icon, and we can have you saying what we want you to say that, you know, is not too radical, but enough to get the conversation going.
And I think I learned that mostly when a friend of mine said, you know, that you can offer these interviews and this platform to other people who are of colour, who are, you know, trans people. And I'm like, that didn't even come into my head.
Yeah.
And I don't know why. I just wasn't used to the media, but I thought that's a fantastic idea. Of course I'm going to do that. So as well as trying to donate as much money as I could from like interviews that I get to grassroots charities, I remember this one particular time where I think it was the BBC, ironically, and I'm going to name and shame him because I don't care anymore. But back in the day, I was like, I can't name and shame him. Yeah. But I had said, I have this person to talk about police brutality, which is what they wanted me to talk about. And she is black and she is trans. Yeah. And they were like, oh, we don't really know about that. And I was
just imagine their faces right now.
And it was a phone call, and I just thought, this is really what you guys are doing. And obviously it is. People have been telling me this is what it's like. Yeah. And I think the more we call that stuff out when it happens, the better, to show that that's what happens. So there's, unfortunately, most of the time there's nothing I can do, because people will say, the media will say, well, we don't want you on, full stop then, because you're offering it to different people. We want to see you or no one. Or they will pick someone who is in that space, who is a feminist, who is transphobic, or is something that it doesn't quite fit with my views on feminism. But yeah, so that's why I take a lot of the things that I do now and that I'm on TV talking about it. But I think it's important to reiterate as well that every time I do speak about marginalised groups, it often gets cut out. So really? It's, there's no...
Why do you think that is?
Because
if that's not a silly
media
question
companies
to ask.
do not care. They do not want... they hold a lot of power. Yeah. Cis white men hold a lot of power at the top, in politics, in media, in every company. Yeah. And if we're talking about how marginalised groups are actually being treated, they may lose some of that power. And I think they're terrified. I think they know it's probably going to happen at some point, and I hope it does. But I think, they just cut it all out. And I think that's what happened is, with me, I was white woman, very small, I look a certain way, and they were like, yeah, we can put her as the poster girl. I'm not a poster girl, So obviously, mentioning the BBC, speaking of, they've had a bit of a mare the last week. How have you sort of looked at that, and do you think it's similar to your experience? I mean, I have a group chat on WhatsApp, and it's about how bad the Tories are, basically, in a nutshell.
I imagine there's plenty of those at the moment.
But there's a lot of people in it who are on TV. There's a lot of well-known people in this group chat, and we were chatting about it. And I mean, obviously, the BBC has funding from Tories. That's the whole point, is that and
they're also giving out a lot of money as well to various Conservative politicians.
Exactly. So that's where we get it from. It's it's the BBC. Of course, we would love to think that all news channels are unbiased, but that's ridiculous to think.
I mean, everyone's got bias. Like there's no way of removing bias. But I think it's being able to behave in a or at least present in a neutral way, which Gary Lineker wasn't on Match of the Day, making comments, and here cutting in from the right wing.
You've got Alan Sugar that made comments, and there's so many people who have made comments.
And you think some of the comments that Alan Sugar has made, particularly about, you think his comment, the racist photo that he tweeted of the Senegalese football team during the World Cup. Yeah. And it's just and the constant jibes. I mean, there was a lot of stuff about Corbyn, and if you want to criticise Corbyn, fair enough. And if the BBC endorsed that, well, I mean, they endorse a lot of stuff. Yeah. Andrew Neil as well, chairman of The Spectator. And then, Gary Lineker comes on and goes, guys, we shouldn't advocate for the drowning of refugees. And it's like, what? Why are you doing that? Scandalous.
But, why is that even... I don't know why they...
And I think there was the willful misreporting, or we'll just call it lies, about what he'd actually said. He said the language used was reminiscent of 1930s Germany, and they're all going on about, he's talking about 1930, he's talking about the Nazis, he's calling everyone Nazis. It's like, no, he's not.
If the shoe fits,
exactly. Like if you're offended about being called a Nazi for unveiling a policy like that, make of that what you will. That's that's. But interesting that you mentioned power earlier. And what we've noticed really in the last year is this rise in influential alt-right figures in the public sphere. So, your Andrew Tate, your Sneakos, Aidan Ross as well, with predominantly young male audience, talking in quite derogatory ways about women and sort of gender politics. How have you sort of found that as a feminist activist, navigating that in your time?
So I have TikTok. I have a secret TikTok as well as my main one, but I have a secret one where it's just full of feminist stuff. So I see a lot of stuff on there, but if you accidentally like or watch one anti-feminist video, your whole page is going to be full of it. I think what happens at the moment, we've got a lot of polarization. So like people, let's take Andrew Tate, for example. There will be so many videos of his that young boys I think young boys a lot of the time are misinterpreting feminism and not listening to what it actually means. And so
a lot of straw manning.
Yeah, and so they get these videos from Andrew Tate that are talking about motivation and how to be a good, like a solid man and an alpha male and get that money and get the girl that you want, and those things are appealing to young men sometimes, so that would make sense that those videos are being shown to them. However, there's two different types of videos. So they're being shown this, whereas the women and feminists are being shown where Andrew Tate is saying that he hates women and that he wants a virgin for a wife or whatever. And so when a woman says, listen, Andrew Tate's really misogynistic, the men are like, where? I've not seen that, because it's been so polarized. So it's not only the rise of these alt-right guys being so like alpha male and feminist, anti-feminist, it's the fact that they don't often see them videos, the ones that we see, So,
and that's predominantly at the fault of these sort of social media platforms that are pushing this sort of stuff.
They have a code of ethics. It should be in the code of ethics where that they don't polarize stuff so harshly, and that they show a mixed amount of videos depending on the algorithm as well. But at the same time, I feel like if they're watching a lot of alt-right stuff, either that stuff should be banned to a certain extent, or there should be a warning just saying, you understand that these views are not often true.
The thing is with a lot of that sort of stuff is that the people who watch it are not going to give a toss about any sort of disclaimer. Like I remember with Joe Rogan's podcast a few years ago when he was sort of talking about COVID, and some of the stuff he's saying wasn't exactly that true. And Spotify were facing a lot of pressure to remove him from the podcast, from his from their platforms. In the end, they didn't, but what they did was put a disclaimer. And at the end of the day, the people who are listening to Joe Rogan are not going to be looking at that disclaimer going, I should probably do my own research.
They have to put it there. That's the thing. But I think to combat that, I think in schools there needs to be education about misogyny. I know the Mayor of London's put a bit of money towards that, and that's good, but it's too little too late sometimes, I
guess that's the thing, and there was actually a lot of discussions at the start of this academic year amongst teachers and parents on how to deal with people like Andrew Tate and the content that they were putting out, because it was being spouted by kids as young as 11, 12 years old, and because it's so easy to access, and you can't. Can you ban them from? No, because they're gonna find a way. That's the thing. Like
Kids
if you
exactly.
If you like ban something, it's just going to make people want to access it more. So it's about tackling these issues head on. How do you think is the best way to do that?
I think it's about information and education and role models as well. So I mean, when I was younger, I was on the internet. I was seeing all sorts on the internet. I'm 30, so when I was younger, the internet had just come out, and we saw a lot of stuff like
Pain Olympics.
Huh?
Pain Olympics.
No.
Do you not remember Pain Olympics?
No. I mean, I've
for anyone wondering what the Pain Olympics is, do not Google it. No. Do not look at it.
But I mean, I was on like Omegle when it was the start. Omegle would just. I mean, I'm older than Instagram, so that I mean, like that's so that I grew up half and half. It was very. Yeah. But I've seen some stuff, and kids will access that stuff no matter what. I wasn't well versed in computers, and I knew how to access that stuff. It goes around in schools. It's just something that happens. But I think that if I had that education and that information, I'd say mid-20s. Yeah. And immediately when I was given this information, I started to learn for myself. It's teaching kids critical thinking skills and showing them what is there and showing them what feminism actually is, and also having male role models who are, it doesn't have to be male, but oftentimes young boys will stereotypically go towards a male figurehead, and I'm trying not to be stereotypical there, but it just does happen.
I would say that is the case. I think with the male, but that's the thing with male role models. Who do men look at? For me, when I was growing up, a lot of the time we were told, sports stars, footballers, and then it came to a point where we were suddenly told, actually, no, don't look at those guys because they're not nice people. I would say now, particularly with, you think some of the England footballers that we've got, very good role models, Rashford, Henderson, Pickford recently did a video, those sort of guys, those are good people to look up to. But I guess, because there's sort of young boys aren't sure who to look up to in that sort of sense. That's why probably they're drawn to, the likes of Andrew Tate and these sort of chaps.
But that's it. I think more male celebrities, in my opinion, more celebrities in general, I think the more people are open about it. I think celebrities at the moment are getting into politics a lot more. You see Carol Vorderman, Hugh Grant, I'm pretty sure, was talking about the Tories at some point.
He was big during the Brexit saga.
They're talking about these things now, and people listen because they do have a platform, they do have fans. So the more people that are talking about feminism, the better.
What kind of feminism do you think is good to promote, though? Because obviously I think feminism is like I feel I am mansplaining feminism to a feminist activist. Let's do this. This has never been done before.
I'm intrigued.
But no, you obviously got like liberal feminism, you have intersectional feminism, those sort of, which do you think is the best? Do you think sort of promote all of them, or is it like
intersectional feminism? It has to be intersectional, because if we're fighting feminism but we're not fighting racism or homophobia, you're not going to get anywhere. It all falls under the same thing. So what I would say is that, feminism is about equity. I would say equality, but equity mainly because people have different needs, people are complex. So I think raising everyone to the point where they have the same opportunities, the same sort of, they can do the same things without fear. But it's, it goes so far back, it's very hard to combat all these things at the same time. But I think a lot of people call themselves feminists when they're not particularly feminists. You've got a lot of feminists that are excluding certain groups of women, and that isn't feminism, Like I once had a friend who was talking about being Muslim, and he said, well, those people that are doing harm aren't Muslim, because to be Muslim, you have to be at peace and not kill anyone. And do you know what I mean? So the whole point of feminism, as a definition, is to be equal with everyone and provide equity for everyone and be supportive of everyone. So if you're actively excluding a group of women or excluding even a group, that doesn't make any sense. Like I don't get along with a lot of groups, especially in feminism, but I'm not going to exclude them from conversations necessarily. Unless they're causing harm to another group, which oftentimes we see with like TERFs and things like that. So it's hard, but that's why I'm writing a book about it. Get the book.
Do you want to talk about? Let's talk about this book. So it may sound like a silly question, but what's it about?
Feminism.
What?
Yeah, I know. It's weird for me to pick that topic. Yeah, but I just random out of the hat. But no, Bite Back Publishing were very lovely. I was very lucky. They came to me with it, so I didn't even have to pitch it. I've always been a fan of writing anyway. I've written a lot of articles and things like that, but they came to me and said, do you want to write a book for us? I was like, of course, as long as I have a lot of free reign with it. A lot of people asked if I've got a ghostwriter or anything. Nope, I am writing this whole thing by myself.
And what's the title of the book?
I can't tell you yet.
Can't tell us.
It's a secret. It's very good though.
It's a good title.
It's so good. I came up with all by myself.
All by yourself.
But I hope that it's going to be one of those books that anyone can pick up and relate to. Within feminism,
I guess that's the thing, because with these sorts of issues, it requires everyone to get on board. Yeah, and I think, but with men, for example, in order to sort of get them on board, do you think? Let me ask you this. Sound like John Berthelot. Let me ask you something. No. Do you think that men can be feminists? Yes,
very much so. I know people often call them feminist allies. I knew a guy who was actually a lecturer at my university. And I don't know if he'll even see this, but I know he follows me on Twitter at the moment. But if you're out there, you know who you are. He is amazing. He actually taught me some stuff with feminism. It's one of those things where he had obviously listened to his female friends and really listened and really understood, really done his own learning, because women shouldn't always be teaching men. You have Google. Google is so big. You can research this stuff, It's like men will be so into this football team and like know every player, know everything about them, the whole backstory, but then they won't be able to research feminism a little bit. Like, it's not that hard. I think, You can research it. You can be a feminist. And the more you talk about it, the better. Within your lane, of course. Like, don't ever say that you know more than women.
I guess with the increase
but
in these discussions sort of comes this idea of where we're seeing sort of these constraints being put on sort of social progression. And it comes into this idea of whether, these aren't my words, these are someone else's words, this idea of whether women's rights have gone too far. How do you respond to that?
It's such a load of trash. Am I allowed to swear on the podcast?
You can swear on the podcast if you want.
Absolute bullshit. So yeah, I think it's such a ridiculous thing to think that women's rights have gone too far when we have like abortion right laws at the moment. We have, you know, at the moment there is still a pay gap. There's still a pay gap. And the fact is, okay, ask any woman that you know, a friend, anyone, and ask them if they have a story about being sexually assaulted. And they may not want to tell you. They may say, no, nothing's happened because they don't want to tell you, and that's their own right. But I guarantee almost all of them have. And that shows you feminism is needed because, and it's called feminism because women have been oppressed. And that's the whole point. You know, I obviously care about men as well. I care about men's mental health. There's a lot of issues that men have that, you know, are sometimes a disparity with women's issues. But I think if we're all just focusing, you know, if you're raising money for lung cancer, if someone comes up to you and goes, well, why are you not focusing on brain cancer? What are you doing? Donate, help. Do you know what I mean? Just help. Because I'm always talking about men's rights as well. Everyone should be talking about women's rights. Everyone should be fighting for everyone's rights. Human rights, that's the whole point. We're all in it together. Yeah. We're all being screwed over. Why are we fighting each other, you know? Exactly. 100%. You know, you've got men who have been assaulted themselves, and that must be so terrifying. I cannot imagine, you know, in this day and age, it's very hard for men to come forward about things and talk about things. To friends, to anyone. So for me, you know, I think the patriarchy is responsible for that. I think men have created this atmosphere where if you're talking about your issues, if you're talking about what's happened to you, oftentimes you're going to be embarrassed, you're going to feel ashamed, you're not going to be supported in the right ways, and you won't want to talk to people. So it's, you know, I've seen it myself. I've seen friends of mine who are men who have been assaulted, and they are so terrified of coming out about it because they're a man, because they don't know how to talk about it, because they're scared of talking about it. So for me, feminism deals with that as well. It's saying that we're trying to fight for everyone's rights, including men. And I think that men should have the option and should feel free and without fear be able to talk about their issues and the things that they've gone through. And I think in turn that will alleviate a lot of this, you know, toxic masculinity and rage.
Patsy, before you go, is there anything that you've got to promote, or anything that's up and coming, any up and coming projects? What have you got going?
Just the book at the moment.
Yeah.
I have some things in the back of my head that I want to do, but those things will take a lot of time. So I'm just taking it day by day at the moment. My calendar is very full up. Yeah.
But we are very glad to have you here and to have you as our first guest. Thank you so much for joining us. And to all of you listening, wherever you are listening from, please stay safe, stay informed, and join us for the next episode. Thank you.